Okay, this is the OSRA client meeting for Sunday, January 4th, 2015. And we've been in production for a week. So I think tonight instead of the developers talking, I think we would like to hear from the client how things are going. If I know that there was one issue that came up yesterday that needed to be addressed, and I think we got that fixed up, and everything should be working now. But otherwise, what are your initial impressions of the application? How is everything working? Any feedback you can give us at this point would be very valuable.
Okay. The first thing to say that we only tried to upload orphans now. The only thing we did was uploading orphans. We had problems because there were a few validations that was stopping us because getting the information from Syria is very hard at this point, and we are trying to proceed as fast as we can. So there was only one list ready to be uploaded, and we uploaded it so far. We didn't try entering sponsors. We did not try linking them with orphans yet. We are preparing the list. So much more lists will be ready by this week.
Okay.
No problems so far. No bugs, nothing.
Okay, that sounds very reassuring. Do you have any questions? Any other specific feedback for us at this point?
Well, I hope you could give us some more time to try more features and do more with the application to give you feedback.
Okay. In that case, I guess let's leave that for next week, for our next week's client meeting, and at some point, maybe again at the next client meeting, or maybe the week after that, we can start talking about the next phase of the application. We already have some tasks in our system that are labeled as phase 1, but we obviously, now that the application is live, we will need to sit down with you again, and revisit them, prioritize them, and you will probably come up with more things that you would like to be implemented soon, and maybe some other things to be pushed to later dates. So let's say tentatively either next week or in 2 weeks we can have a planning meeting for phase 1. How does that sound?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
You mean that we will not have a meeting next week?
No, I think we will still have the meeting next week, but next week we might, if you have a lot of feedback for us, we might end up talking about the application, its current state, discuss if there are any issues or bugs that you've identified, or any things that need to be implemented very quickly. But if that doesn't happen, and if we have time next week, then maybe we can do this planning meeting next week.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Either from the client side or from the dev team, does anybody else have anything to add?
Not from me.
No.
Okay. Well, in that case, we're very glad that the application is holding up so far. It's very good to see that the real data is now going into the database, and everything seems to be working. So please keep us up to date, and we'll see you next week.
Okay.
Okay, guys.
Oh,
Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, good night.
Um, do we have
Where do we
anything to
like them?
discuss here? I mean, well, I'm sure we have a lot to discuss, but specifically tonight.
Looks like there was an OSRA 322 that needed to be looked at.
322.
Whether or not we use the facade pattern.
Right. Yeah, that's certainly one thing we can talk about. Yeah. Well, if there's nothing else, then well, let's get into that.
I also had a question for the team about 319. I was gonna start that and then realized I needed some clarification.
Add action items to partner show. Edit partner and upload orphan list.
Yeah, so the action items are like the buttons that are in the top right in active admin versions. There's no reason that they have to be buttons or in the top right, so I guess the way I initially envisioned it was basically the same as active admin implements it, but we don't necessarily need to do it that way. If anybody has any ideas or thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have some thoughts.
That's also kind of why I didn't do that story.
Yeah.
How about using Ajax and just loading a model or something? When you click the link to orphan list, it loads a new window with the orphans, and you just select one and you stay on the same page.
Well, that's good specifically for one button, but I meant in general for all the action items, because some of them would be like edit partner or I don't know what the other ones are. I forgot. Let me look.
How's everybody for time today? Let's start with that. Can everybody spare 20, 30 minutes?
I can.
Do half an hour.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in that case, why don't we, since the subject has come up, and, well, maybe not. Brian, my quick answer to that question would be to not spend too much time thinking about the CSS at this point, and just stick those links in, and the styling and the layout, etc., will come at a later time. And certainly when it comes to Ajax, I think that's, these are terrific ideas, but I would move very incrementally. So we implement the minimal functional thing, and then we move to add the bells and whistles later on. How does everybody? What does everybody think about that?
I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah, I like that. I like the Ajax idea for the link to orphan button could maybe benefit from that, but as far as the other ones, I'm not so sure.
Well, yeah, certainly we will. I think when it comes to especially such a, I don't know, maybe heavyweight solution as Ajax rather than just styling or positioning, I think we would definitely have to evaluate that on a.
Yeah, when we are making the version 2 of the application.
Well, yeah, and I think that's true, and I think the other point is that we will have to make a decision on a sort of button-by-button, link-by-link basis for things like that.
Right.
Yeah, the link to orphan button was so constrained by the active admin framework being unhappy with things in Rails. We could do it any way we wanted, even if we didn't use Ajax, so that's another thing. I guess that's one of the major reasons we started thinking about moving to Rails in the first place, was that button.
Yeah.
Well, since everybody's available, and maybe these two discussions don't necessarily have to be related. I think the question, Brian, that you had, I think we've are you happy with the answers?
Yeah. Are you talking about
Okay.
facade pattern now, or still the action item?
No, still the placement of links and styling,
Oh,
etc.
yeah, I'm satisfied.
Okay. Well, so since we have a bit of time, then maybe this is as good a time as any. And this just kind of ties into that discussion. I got Christopher Milne, the UI design expert that I had reached out to a while ago, got back to me. And basically, if you look at my screen, this is what he's proposing as the layout for our application.
Is that a JPEG mockup?
It's a PDF. How
Okay.
I know he works in Illustrator. I don't know if this is how he created it, but yeah, this is completely non-functional.
I like it. Nice and
It's
clear.
very smart.
I thought so too. I think what struck me right away is that he's captured I think the functionality of our application very well. I think he understood very well what we need to be able to do, or at least what the client needs to be able to do. So this is the only mock-up, the only wireframe that he's done so far. We can basically have a look at it, and if there are any things that really are not acceptable for us, maybe we can ask questions and reach out to him. But essentially, this is what he envisions, and the way he looks at it, his sort of philosophy is that the whole application gets almost a single-page application feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Because almost the entirety, so this is the orphans view here, and this is obviously your index, but this panel to the right,
Yeah, it is connected with show.
it replaces show, as a matter of fact. So the way he sees it is that this is pretty much the entire show view here in the side panel. You can it is scrollable if you need to display more attributes, and all actions that would be related to this particular object, so edit or we probably don't connect the orphan to the sponsor from here. At least the original idea was to do it through the sponsor, but in any action that is related to this particular record, to this particular object, the buttons for that would be here.
Mm-hmm.
So edit this record, connect to sponsor, etc. And then any actions for that concern not this particular object, but the entire list are up here in the top right corner. So yeah, if in this case we're not creating orphans directly, but for example, on the partner page up here, we would have a create new partner button or link. But yeah, this is how he sees it. And then the other thing is that all the actions, so for example, if you want to edit this orphan, there is a button here that says edit. All that activity would happen in a modal overlay.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't navigate away from this page, you just get an overlay wherein you can edit or connect to a sponsor or what have you. And then once you exit out of it, you're looking back at the exact same view that you had left.
An overlay is like a modal window, right?
Yeah, that's right.
It's beautiful.
It's excellent.
Yeah.
I like it too.
That's what happens when you get UI people to design it rather than developers.
Right. Exactly. So I will share this on Slack, I suppose, and I would encourage everybody to have a look at it closely and maybe to kind of think through the functionality. If you have any questions, we can definitely send them to Christopher, and he's already responded to some questions. So if there's anything that I can answer, then I'll send an answer right away. But basically, yeah, I think this is excellent.
So what would you call those two separate groups of action buttons? Like model actions and object actions, or?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, let's think of a way to refer to them, I suppose.
Yeah, because that's probably going to be the first piece of this we're going to need.
So these are individual object or individual record actions. And
Record actions?
Yeah, and these are model actions or class actions.
Well, should we stick to follow the idea of an object and a class, and like it creates a class method, isn't it, in many ways, and updates an instance method, almost.
Right. So class and instance methods, or class and instance actions.
Items,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. Now, one thing that Christopher said is he's cautioned us not to start actually coding this right away, because he would like to implement to mock up a couple more views, and again run them by us to make sure that everything is falling into place. But having said that, I think when it comes to, for example, question that what you were asking earlier, Brian, are those buttons or links, and where do we place them? I think we can take this as a rough guideline, at least at this point, and move ahead with that.
Yeah, the first piece of this that I would take away is to separate the action items into two categories.
Mm-hmm.
We can start that now, just kind of planning ahead for the future. Because I really like the way this looks. Even though it's not done and some of the stuff's in the wrong place, it looks fantastic.
All right.
But it does look like a single-page application, right? So it does seem like it's not just pure Rails. So when you click in here on your mockup, the third orphan is highlighted. So you are presumably on the third orphan. So when you on the fourth orphan, you probably don't want your whole page to reload, right? You would want.
Ideally, no. Of course, you don't. So ideally, yeah, this will be asynchronous. Only this panel gets updated.
Yeah.
And also possibly.
My take on it is it looks like there might be 4 views. On those ones on the left, everything else should probably be Ajax.
Yeah, but I think in terms of fleshing that out and creating a workable system, I would be inclined to make it a full request-response cycle, implement all your partials, and then slowly Ajaxify, if that's a word.
It is now.
It is, yep. Each of your partials with your buttons that create that Ajax, and implement the Ajax bits slowly, carefully.
I can't help. As soon as I hear the single page application phrase, I've been looking for any excuse to try out that Opal Ruby thing. The thing I call Ruby script.
Oh.
I'm getting a migraine.
Regardless of whether we go
works, either Angular or Backbone or something.
In fact, I might join a project just if they use that right now. I'm looking for any excuse to check that out.
Start one up.
Yeah.
Don't wait for them to come to you. But I echo what Craig says, is that no matter what, whether it's this design or a slightly different design or a completely different design, we still implement it stepwise, and gradually we implement the functionality and then we refine it. So we can do this entirely with Rails, And no, it's not going to be pretty that every time you click on a different orphan, the entire page reloads, but it works. But then once that's in place, then we get into the asynchronous requests and maybe even start thinking about JavaScript frameworks or some unholy Ruby JavaScript.
But does this mean that now you'll have to break what you built?
Well, I mean, not necessarily. A lot of link tos suddenly work just out the box when you make them link to remote.
Right, yeah.
If you've designed them well. So you basically have your link to which refreshes the whole page and renders it, and then you implement all your various sub pages, if you like, your partials, get them all working, and then you change the link to a link to remote, and that will just re-render one of your partials through Ajax.
And that is still pure Rails, right?
That's still pure Rails. No Angular, no.
Okay.
So you're sending through Ajax, you're sending a JavaScript command to just replace a partial.
Yeah.
And inside the command, there's the whole HTML that needs to be rendered.
Yeah, I think you create partials. So at the moment, our partials are all HTML.erb, aren't they?
Yeah.
But I think Ajax ones. Where did I last do that?
The JRB.
Yeah, or they're either. I'd have to look up. My memory fails me at the moment, but they're basically.
Or
I'm wondering whether they're JavaScript or. Let me find out rather than harp on it now and send everyone down the wrong thing.
It's js.erb.
Yeah. Okay.
That
doesn't sound. Yeah, that sounds right.
Yeah.
And then that JavaScript function re-renders whatever it needs to do.
So basically, we're not going to run into a situation where we implement a whole bunch of stuff in Rails and then we have to throw it all out and start from scratch.
Don't think so.
Right.
And for what we've done at the moment, that's the better option, because if we're going to something like Angular, we're talking about throwing away everything that we've got, introducing an API that returns JSON, and then basically implementing everything in Angular and just using the Rails part for the JSON. Sending the JSON data out when it's called, and basically a RESTful interface that serves and receives JSON.
it does sound so very tempting.
What Craig just described.
Yep.
Do you guys think that Angular isn't too much for this small application?
Oh, it probably is too much.
I have nothing against Angular, and it may well be where we go in the future, but I think in the same way that we've done active admin and then we're moving to Rails in a piecemeal fashion, I see us implementing this in Rails as a non-Ajax application, and then slowly implementing Ajax bits to make it more responsive. And then if we find out that that's still not cutting the mustard, maybe starting to implement a JSON API and roll out a single page application.
I like that plan. Step by step.
Yes.
It just, I mean, some of these steps require throwing everything away, like our active admin bit basically is going to be thrown away.
Yeah, but you know, they tell you in Agile all the time, don't they? Write the first one, throw it away.
Throw it away. Yeah.
That's how we learn.
I think it might even be unfair to include active admin in this list, or perhaps not. But the fact is, I don't know if we would be where we are today, both in terms of our expertise and just the appreciation that the pure array of the things that pure Rails offers, if we hadn't lived through the active admin years or whatever it was. So, and the other part of it is that we can sit here and talk about forever. How should we do it ultimately? Is it going to be Angular? Is it going to be Backbone? Is it going to be Ember? Is it going to be Opal? Is it going to be whatever? And we're still not going to get it right. Chances are. If we do it incrementally, that's basically following the agile process, and that we deliver. First we deliver the bicycle, then we deliver the motorcycle, and then we deliver the car, and then we turn that car into a Ferrari. Yeah. Whereas if we start building the Angular version right now, the client is going to be looking at the active admin interface for an awfully long time.
Right. Yeah.
Or they get a Ferrari with bicycle wheels.
and a bell to ring. Okay, so I'm going to upload this wireframe to Slack. Everybody's please download it, have a look at it. If there's anything that any questions that we need to send to Christopher, then we'll do that. But in the meantime, I'll let him know that everybody's very much on board with this layout. And
am I correct in understanding that on the very left-hand side of that mockup, the part that is called sponsorships is something that we are not going to use or need?
Yeah, most likely.
So we'll most likely need something like orphans, sponsors, partners, probably users.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other thing that Christopher talked, I think I'm sure I mentioned it, is that his approach when he was thinking about all of this was to really think about the different user roles right from the beginning. So my understanding then that this is a view not for an admin, but for a regular user, and maybe even a particular kind of a regular user. So a regular user doesn't need to doesn't need to be able to see other users of the system. They're only concerned with managing the actual information in the database. Whereas an admin would probably get, a user's menu item here, or maybe elsewhere. I don't know.
Yeah, so the only difference of the admin from the regular user is that the admin is going to get another icon with a link.
Yeah, sorry?
At the moment, until a whole load of features.
Yeah, and there's also...
I could see other things the admin getting too, like, this database object was last touched by this user at this time, and stuff like that could be admin only in the show view.
Yeah, some kind of like a, what is it, versioning or tracking?
Yeah, like a history or blame or something.
Yeah. And there is a possibility that we would have ultimately also different classes of users. So, for example, one of them might not see partners ever because they're sponsor agents who are not concerned with importing orphan lists or things like that. So yeah.
Okay.
I think he's done an amazing job, I have to say.
Yes, I'm very happy with what he's delivered so far. Okay, so if time permits, we can talk about other things. If we want to talk about facades.
I think we should first decide whether or not we're going to use them.
Yeah. It sounds like you have an opinion about that, Brian.
No, not so much. It's I just need an answer to go forward.
Right.
It's more that than having an opinion on it. I mean, it's an interesting idea. I could go for it or without it. It doesn't matter as much to me. But if somebody has any strong opinions about it, I'm listening.
I've come across that pattern in other places, and I'm attracted to it. But I've also seen it used where you extend the model. So you would have what we're doing at the moment. It's a partner, isn't it? So maybe it's a partner form. And then any validation or anything that may be specific to the form, but the partner doesn't need to worry about. So this is a bad example because it would be more user related, but checking that a password's being confirmed would be pushed into that class. And it would also hold the attributes for any of the drop-down boxes or what have you that need to be held in the view for the form.
Because basically that's extracting the form object
into its own model effectively.
Yeah.
But a model that extended sponsor.
Right. So it's basically, yeah, the difference is it's a question of where do you load that information from? Does it come with the object that you're trying to display in the form, or does it come from elsewhere with the form itself?
So for the sponsor, I don't know whether I'm answering your question. Say you had in your models directory, you would have a sponsor folder, and then you would namespace your model, say sponsor : form or form 4 or whatever we wanted to call it, and then it would extend the sponsor model, and it would hold all the attributes, and then in the controller you would just launch an instance of that. And you get all the fine stuff and everything for free because it's extending the sponsor model.
So what is the benefit of this approach?
Well, the benefit is that in the controller, we've got some complicated controller actions where we instantiate like half a dozen objects and put a load of complex logic in the controller, and controllers shouldn't really be holding logic. They should be held in a model. But if we just put that in the, what would you call them, the vanilla models that we have at the moment, if you like, the models that are really designed to just represent rows in a database, you get very fat models with uncontrollable complexity. So if you had, for example, a sponsor form model, then you would basically inherit from the sponsor model, so you get all the active record stuff, and the sponsor model would just deal with what it needs to deal with, and then all the other bits like loading in all your statuses and all your provinces and everything would be done in that model and controlled in one place where it was easy to
Yeah.
Go on.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that I'm following that, and just right off the top of my head, I can't think of what would be the advantage of one approach over the other.
So what would be the cost and benefit of that? I guess specifically the cost.
Well, the cost, I suppose, in any case, is that when you start removing logic and instance variables out of views and controllers, you maybe lose some of the readability, because now you need to track all the way back to the model and maybe to the model that extends the model to understand where things are coming from. But I mean, there is certainly a lot to be said for it, because you know, generally the active record models, they essentially, they shouldn't have to deal with anything except for actually storing the information in a database and pulling it out of the database. So it's not up to them to do anything else, and we definitely we don't want to overload the controller too.
I think where I see that extending the model as being slightly more beneficial to a vanilla facade pattern is that you get all your you get validations and save or callback hooks for free. So without having to add all those at the top of the class declaration. So when you go to so say you have a form object that extends the model, and you need to check a load of stuff before it's submitted, all that could be in a before save callback, and the before save callback could delegate to the model and instantiate all that stuff, do any validation that it needed to do, or in the same way that we've talked about the conversation where you've just put a reply up to having an observer. I mean, maybe some of that could be delegated to a before save.
Yeah.
In one of those. I don't think there's a lot in it. I think it's marginal. But if we're going to dive in there, it's just worth maybe thinking it through and seeing which is the best before we start.
This, I'm going to share a link. I don't know if it's very possible that everybody has seen it by now, but I think it's there's a lot of good information there, and form objects are discussed in it as well. It's point number 3. If anybody wants to look at it right now.
So you see that they've, rather than extending the model, they've included all the active model stuff, haven't they?
Yeah. Well, you know, we don't need to follow the exact.
No, I know, but I'm just saying you could do either. I guess
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to say. But they've got it there in.
Actually, if you look at point number 5, there is also such a thing as view objects, which is maybe even closer to what we're talking about right now.
Well,
although this really seems to be basically the same facade implementation that we had talked about before.
yeah, maybe it's view objects for views. But I think where you made the comment, I was loading in models so that we could display them in a select box.
Right.
And does that make it more applicable as a form object, or? I guess it's difficult to think because we're dealing with such a simple model for the partner that, you know, all the validation stuff and everything, you know, you sit there and you think, well, there's not really much for the form object to do. But if it was a more complicated object, such as the inactivating or activating a sponsorship, then there could be quite a lot to do.
Yeah.
And then that definitely falls in category 3 rather than category 5, doesn't it?
Right. Oh, yeah, yeah. I mean, when it comes to something like loading in provinces and statuses, because that is something that is likely to happen across multiple forms. Because we need, or is that true? No, maybe not. Maybe it's not true. Statuses, yes, but provinces, no. Well, where I was going with it is that maybe there is reason to separate this, to break this down even further, where something just furnishes the statuses and provinces, for example, or like basically is just a loader, and it gets included into
each form object.
Each form object, yeah.
The other thing that it's worth, I think, maybe mentioning while we're doing all this is maybe we need a scope in the model.
In this case, what for?
Or, well, I was thinking in terms of, say we have statuses or provinces, and at the moment they want to show provinces by name. Or order it in a certain way, order it by ID. And then in the future they change to order by alphabetically. If we've got 60 views where statuses.all, if we've got a default scope for how we display that status that's shown in a select box, then we just change the scope.
Yeah.
Or if we, coming back to my, when we were talking about facade patterns and whether we extended the object, I mean, if we did have a status form object, for example, and it was an extension of status, then the scope could actually be in the form object.
Right. Yeah, I see that.
And then you would have a scope that says as select or what have you. And then you can say order by ID, and then in all your things that deal with that, you're calling that scope rather than the status as all. And then if they change it to want to see it by alphabetical, then you just go into that scope and you say order by name. And again, you know, maybe status is a bad example. I can't imagine it ever being anything other than by alphabetical order, but...
Well, and there's 3 of them. So
yeah.
Yeah. And provinces, perhaps. Well, that actually reminds me, unrelated to this discussion, but I would like to at least explore the possibility of converting all statuses to enums and getting rid of the status and sponsorship status models entirely. And so they would basically, there would be enums within each model that would represent its current state. I think that would eliminate complexity, and that at the same time that buys us a lot of methods for free.
Yeah.
But that's that's not immediately relevant.
Well, I mean, as we're doing this stuff, maybe it is.
I don't think we're any closer to answering Brian's question, though. Possibly further away.
Yeah, I think farther away.
You mean whether we do? What was the question? So,
The question was whether we do anything, and if we do anything, should it be a facade pattern or form object? Or we just leave it as is?
Well, I think the original question was whether or not we use facades.
Right. Well, yeah. Sorry, that's where it started.
I think there's merit in trying this and seeing how well it does. I think the decision of whether it should be a form object or a facade is maybe a little bit harder.
Hey, Christian and Andre, what do you guys think?
Well, I never done this facade, moving all the logic into a facade pattern, so not really. I think I understand what you mean, but not having experience, I don't know what to say.
Well, I mean, for example, we've got the forms that we're using at the moment, and each of the controllers where you update or save, or
Yeah.
you're making the same calls again and again in those methods.
Yeah, and those will be moved into a new class.
Yeah, so it's just a case of a grandiose way of saying don't repeat yourself and abstracting that repetition out into somewhere else.
But you would have to have one of those for each model, right?
Yep.
Or not?
Yep.
Oh, I thought one for all.
So if you needed one for each model, how would you not be repeating yourself?
Well, we can do one for all of them and use meta programming to separate them.
Each case will be different for each model. I mean, saying how are you not repeating yourself? We're only repeating ourselves in the same way that we're repeating ourselves every time we create a model, right?
Do we create models? We haven't created a model in a long time.
So, but by the same analogy, if we created a form object for each of these models, we wouldn't create a form object in a long while.
I think there is more to it than it's not just about getting rid of repetition. It's also abstracting and simplifying.
Yeah, I think the primary thing is only sending one object to the view, right? Am I missing something?
Well, that's where the discussion starts. And I think if we only go as far as introducing facades, then that's probably where it ends. If we start talking about form objects, then we're definitely venturing into new territory.
Well, let's look at our. Let's look. I mean, if you look at the orphan model at the moment and all the stuff we do when we or a controller, what does the orphan? Well, we don't have a controller, do we? That.
Well, but that tells you the controller is
Going to be.
Well, if you look at the form in the ActiveAdmin config file, that gives you some idea of what the controller is doing. Like it populates a whole bunch of stuff.
Has anybody come up with a name for those controller/view mashups?
Where will be this place? In what
cluster. Yeah.
This is a little bit harsh because we're looking at ActiveAdmin, and I think ActiveAdmin makes the file more complicated than it needs to be. But if you look at what we've got in the ActiveAdmin orphan file, you know, it's some of that would inevitably go into the controller.
Sure. I mean, yeah.
Go on.
Well, I was just going to say for any field, if we're talking about forms specifically, for any field that you need to pre-populate and you need to reach to another model and pull that into another table and pull those values in, that's an action that has to happen in the controller. And if we don't want to be doing that and polluting our controllers by instantiating all those objects and then polluting the view by having all those instances, then this is where the facade, I think, would really shine, in that it packages everything up into a single object that the controller doesn't have to worry about how it's created. So the controller, for example, for the orphan edit action, it doesn't need to know that it needs to pull out statuses and orphan sponsorship statuses and whatever else it pulls into that form. It just knows that it needs to call orphan facade, and orphan facade gets all that done. And then the whole package that contains that particular orphan object plus all the methods to get all these, all this other information, one single package gets sent to the view.
Hopefully as a save. And then that save action, this is how I see it in my head, that save action initiates a whole process of whatever it needs to do to make everything right. When it's a form, sorry.
Oh, yeah.
If you were,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I don't. Well, if you were trying to sell me this, I probably wouldn't be buying it.
Which one? Either or?
No, I just haven't heard of anything yet that is a good reason to do it, and it buys us more than it costs. I mean, it's good ideas, but this app isn't terribly complicated, and I just don't know what all this extra stuff in the test for it. It's probably better, theoretically, but
okay.
Seems like it might be overkill.
Can you do me a favor, Nick? Have you got access to your code at the moment? I mean, if anyone can look up in their code, app admin pending orphan list.
I'm looking.
And look at the collection actions.
On my screen, you can see.
So they would, if these were out of active admin, these would be in a controller somewhere. And these are the things that you see again and again in controllers.
Yeah, especially that validate one is that's screaming refactor.
Now, if you can take that out and put that in an object where all that is handled, so that if you have another controller somewhere else that implements similar functionality or what have you, you're accessing the same object.
But basically, the rationale for simplifying things either through facades or form objects, or maybe not even simplifying, but for using them, is that if you think about the MVC paradigm, the controller should be, it should be just about as dumb as possible, right? As skinny as possible and just about as dumb as possible, because all it needs to do is to get the right information and send that off to the view. the controller itself shouldn't be thinking, okay, well, I need to populate the provinces drop-down box. Where do I get province names from? I need to perform some kind of logic on something and either do this or do that, and then send that to the view.
And if there's a query in the params, then the province list that gets returned needs to be in a different order.
Is there, by the way, any rationale behind that, apart from the mantra that the controllers need to be slim and the models need to be fat?
The models should not be fat either. That's, I think.
Something has to be fat.
If
you have a lot of code, something has to be fat.
No, I disagree with that. That's exactly what we're talking about doing. You know, creating these things so nothing gets fat.
If you have more things, then none of it needs to be fat, I think is what he's saying.
If you maintain, if you really, really, really well stick to the single responsibility principle, then you have a lot of bits with single responsibility, and they do that one thing, they do it well, but they don't do anything else, and they stay slim.
Modulate.
Modular, precisely, yeah. I mean, I've seen it said over and over again that when it comes to active record models, the only thing that they should be concerned with is saving information to the database and getting that information out of the database. You know, all the logic that's in them should be going into form objects or service objects, anything like that. And when it comes to the controller, I think that's, you know.
So basically, instead of having a lot of code in one file, you have lots of files with bits of code. Why is the latter approach easier to follow than the former approach? I would, like, according to the MVC, to the very innate design of Rails, I would expect to go to the models folder and to see all the logic concerning orphan in the orphan.rb file. Then suddenly, when you start using other patterns, when you start distilling or breaking the logic in the orphan.rb file, then it gets confusing. Like, what is the responsibility of the orphan.rb file then? Is it just to get the information about the orphan and to save it?
Yes.
Is it validating the information as well, or is it not?
Well, that's part of retrieving information to and from the database. If it's database related, if it's a validation that's not related to what gets saved in the database, then it should go somewhere else, I think.
So what would be the good example of something that does not belong to the active record model?
Well, if you look at a user model at the a user model.
Oh.
Now, how many things may a user model touch? And so you have forms to change your details. You have so many different things that model may have to implement. Or if you look at our orphan model at the moment, you know, our orphan model is worrying about sponsorship statuses.
And it has multiple, dozens of lines of logic that deal with the orphan's father, for example. So,
yep.
You know, technically, yeah, it's the orphan's father, so the orphan should be concerned about that.
But I guess that's because you wanted to keep the information about orphan's father in the orphan's table. Huh?
Initially, we're talking about taking it out.
Yeah, and then you get a situation when orphan's mother is in the orphan's table, orphan's father is in its own table.
Well, I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that represents the application where the father, in the application that we're writing at the moment, the father has a much more prominent role than the mother does.
Okay.
keeping everything together, you end up with you end up with classes that are hundreds of lines long. You end up with methods that are dozens of lines long. And I think very quickly, in the beginning, I agree that it's very easy, and it's easier to start putting everything into one place, so that if you want to understand what a class does, or if you want to understand what a method does, you just read through the method, and it's all right there.
Mm-hmm.
But then, in the case of a method, once you start getting into, it starts running up to 20, 30 lines of code, and there are branching and nested conditionals in there. It's extremely difficult to understand where the flow will return, what will come out of the method. It's difficult to understand what's happening, so you start extracting methods out of it. And as long as you're naming, as long as the interface between either the methods or the classes, as long as it's clearly named to the point where you understand exactly what this class does that is getting called somehow a reference from the class that you're looking at, then I think you're okay. So in the case of Orphan's father, we like I said, we have a lot of there are a lot of attributes, first of all, that belong to the father, unlike the mother.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a lot of logic in the validating those attributes. If you extract the father class, but you make it very clear from the orphan model that orphan has a father, and it is simply, outsourcing, let's say, everything, all the logic that has to belong to that, if it's referring to a separate class, then I would argue that the orphan class is easier to read at this point and understand, not more complex. And what I was sharing on my screen earlier, so this is what Craig and I were talking about that started this whole discussion about facades.
Mm-hmm.
So you can see here, for example, for the edit action in a controller, if we're talking about not using anything, then the controller needs to retrieve the partner, and then it needs to retrieve all the provinces, retrieve all the statuses, assign them to 3 different instance variables, and then the view accesses all those 3 different instance variables separately. They're all separate entities. If we decide that, for example, provinces, there will never be a partner from Damascus, or for whatever reason you have it, the controller has to change, but it's not really the controller's area of concern that we've changed the logic that pertains to provinces. All the controller should be concerned with is delivering the information to the view. So to me, the facade pattern extracts everything out of the controller. The controller, all it needs to do is say, create a new aggregate that is the facade, or create a new instance variable that is the facade, and that incorporates the partner, and that's what the controller sends to the view, and then it doesn't worry about any of this.
Okay. So you will have one facade file, right? With one facade class.
Yeah, Brian was asking about that. I think it, we'll see how things evolve, I suppose, because statuses are common to many different views. So I think there is a case to be made that maybe there should be maybe we compose the facade out of multiple little modules, because statuses will need to be accessed by many views, provinces by fewer views, and something else by only one. But that's something I think that will get fleshed out as we actually start building this. I don't think we can plan this right now.
So I guess for the short term then, moving forward, do we want to go with facade but not view objects? Just you know, for the next 5-10 PRs short term?
Well, if people aren't sold on facades, then we don't need to do anything. We just stay with what we have. You know, just because Sentimets thinks that you shouldn't be passing more than one instance variable from the controller to the view doesn't mean that we have to listen to her.
I'm less worried about passing one variable, but you know, I think it's one of those things where maybe you have 3 variables, and then maybe you implement a bit of logic in the controller, and then before you know it, that controller is so tightly coupled, and then someone wants similar functionality somewhere else, and you end up copying and pasting effectively the logic, and it's a recipe for disaster. I think. I guess, you know, I've been stung by this before. So something gets missed, or your application becomes difficult to maintain. You know, just having a simple model, a simple view, and a simple controller is easy when you're writing your first implement a blog tutorial. But when we start dealing with models that have the level of validation that's required for this app and whatnot, I think there's a lot of merit in abstracting that complexity out into another object.
Okay, so well, the summary seems to be that what Craig and I are in favor of, let's say for now at least, facades. Christian, you're uncertain basically. Andre, you seem to be skeptical, and
I think I'm pro this. I like the idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
Andre, are you skeptical? Is that the right way to describe you?
Either way, I can try this facade approach as well. It does seem to be reasonable.
Okay. And Brian, what's your feeling on it?
I don't have a problem trying the facade. I'm skeptical of the view objects or the other things he was talking about at this point in time.
Okay.
That change, but
so let's say that we're going to give facades a shot, and once we get to something more complex, we can come back to the discussion about form objects or view objects or whatever objects.
Yep, certainly by the time we hit orphans or sponsorship, so I don't think a facade will cut it.
All right.
I have a question. Where will these facade files go? In what folder? In the helpers or?
App facade?
Thank you, Christian. I was going to ask the same thing next.
Yeah.
I think I've seen people actually create a facades subfolder in where?
App facades?
Or lib?
Too
Too far.
You know, I haven't been a fan of putting code in lib.
Yeah, me neither.
Well, let's think about where does it belong. This is something that concerns models, controllers, and views.
Well, if for models we have a models directory, for controllers we have a controllers directory, and for views we have a views directory, all under the apps. So why don't we just have a facades directory?
Right.
Because
Yeah,
they're their own thing, aren't they?
It doesn't so much concern
How
the
is
model.
it being accessed?
We can also put them in the helpers.
How are they going to be accessed? Do we need to include the file to write the root, the path to that file? Or are they going to be instantly visible to the whole Rails application?
the entire app folder should be accessible from anywhere, I think.
Because the helpers, I guess the view, aren't helpers only accessible with a view, through the view, and concerns through the controllers or something? Yeah.
Helpers are for views, yes.
So if you try to access a helper from the controller or from the model, it shouldn't work, should it?
No, it shouldn't work, and I don't think it should work, and you don't want it to work, I presume.
No. So yeah. So my idea is if you create a folder, call it a facade, put a facades.rb file in there. Do you need to tell your controller that now you have this folder facades and you should look into it and read the files in there?
Yeah.
I suspect that. Okay, let me share something else.
Just put a link in the group chat.
I'm going to put one more in, although I've shared this before. So in the link that I just shared, it's exactly as Craig said. There is app/facades/whatever.rb. And the controller has no problem seeing that.
Okay.
That looks good.
So this will not go into a module, it's directly the class.
Yeah, it's a separate class. It's not something that you mix into anything. It's and you will instantiate it, which is why it cannot be a module.
Right.
Okay.
Cool.
I think as of now my question is sufficiently answered.
Okay. Well, let's give it a shot, and so certainly if any objections come up, we can always revisit.
So if I can briefly ask, I guess Craig was thinking that these facades would not be enough for the more complex models. So the view objects, what do you do for view objects? What do you do then? How do you create them? What do they do?
Are we going to need any of those for partner?
Brian's anxious to end
Are
this.
we going to use different patterns for different models? Like facade for partner and view objects for something else?
I don't see any problem with that per se. If the partner model is fairly lightweight, if the facade is sufficient to to handle what we want, then that's fine. But if in the case of, for example, sponsorships, where we have something very complicated happening every time sponsorship is inactivated or created, then we can definitely implement a different pattern there. I don't have any problem with mixing things like that.
Okay.
So most of the partners controller are already created. Does this mean a new task will be created to make this facade, or will be only one for everything?
That's a valid question. Brian, where were you thinking of implementing this?
I forgot. Let me look.
Because all that's left, I see it's just the new and the create action that me and Andre will work on today. And should we start with the facade on this, or should we finish this and then we can refactor the whole controller into a new task? I mean, to refactor the. Yeah.
Well, we can leave it up to you guys. If you would like to play with this facade ID and see how you like it, then go ahead and do it. And if not, then just do a classic whole controller, and then we can revisit it later.
Okay, sure.
So I guess I just have one more question, Nick. The OSRA 314.
OSRA 314. refactor index view.
The amount of stories left is getting smaller, and this one keeps hanging around.
Right.
I'm intentionally not selecting this one, but eventually it's going to be the only one left.
Yeah. So using a view partial for partners and or avoiding the use of HTML table. So for the second thing, I had asked Christopher what his thoughts were on using different layouts, so not tabular views for the index actions with fewer objects. And well, his response at the time was basically we just need to evaluate. We need to think about what information the user needs to see, and sort of let that guide us. Having seen his mock-up, I think much more willing to just go with a table if that side panel on the right is going to be effectively the show view. That will be updated every time you switch from one partner to another. Then if that table is basically very minimal, it only shows, partner name and province, for example, and then the panel on the right shows all the other details, then I think I don't have any issue with that.
That's fantastic.
And then view partial for each partner, so that idea of using the yeah, I don't, what, off the top of my head, I don't remember what the value, what value that was supposed to add this using partials in for index views. It just it pushes, your index, the actual index.html.erb file will look very simple, but if you want to see what's actually happening, you have to go open the partial up. Again, I can live without it.
You'll have the partial eventually. It's not important now, but you'll have the partial eventually because presumably you're sponsored, unsponsored, all. Well, no, they'll be going through the same index, maybe, won't they? But if we have filters or potentially, what I'm saying is down the line we may have more than one controller that acts as an index, but in a different way. In which case, you're going to extract that table out into a partial, I guess. But until that happens,
yeah. Yeah. It basically, in this case, you would only use a partial, I think, to simplify the view. How much that adds, I'm not entirely sure. So let's drop it for the time being.
Okay. For the time being, all right.
Well, if we come to a point where we see that there is good cause. So when it's not just about simplifying the view, but maybe when we start thinking about, when we come to a situation where a partial will allow some kind of reuse of code, then that's, that becomes a whole different issue, I think.
Yeah, if Nick was going to implement his business card idea, that would have been perfect for a partial, because you'd have the partial representing like one business card, I guess.
Yeah, well, yeah. It still offers marginal benefit, I think, extracting that out of the index view into a partial. But
well, it depends, because if it was going to be done in Bootstrap, you know how quickly those divs nest.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it would have. I'm just saying, maybe it would. And you don't know until you're coding it at the end of the day and how messy it looks in the view.
Okay, so let's play it by ear. If the views, the index views either get too messy, or we come to a case where a partial will offer us reuse potential, and then we consider this again. Sounds fair?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, guys. Well, let's get some sleep while the application is still running in production, before the client actually starts using it in earnest, and things might start going south.
Hope not.
Yeah, me too. Okay,
Yeah.
so tomorrow we should have a retrospective.
It
Hopefully
seems we have
Pavel will be
quite
here.
a lot of stories that haven't been graded.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Sorry, say it again.
I think we've done. I mean, when we start doing the retrospective, when we start doing the Jira's automatic counting system, I guess the only story that actually had some points in it was this OSRA 300, which had three points, and it will look as if we haven't done anything, I guess.
Well, as long as we stick to this kind of definition of what's a story and what's a task, that's how it's going to be.
Was 244, which I believe is now merged, was it a story or a task?
Which one was 244?
The filters.
No, that's a task, because the filters are already effectively implemented for the client.
Okay, so it does not get any points. And what was that? And the Rails, the migration to Rails also does not get any. Okay.
No.
Yeah, we reserve points for stories that are requested by the client.
Okay.
And everything else is, if it's initiated by us, then it's not a point story.
So you cannot really predict the velocity or you can predict the velocity of how you respond to the client's story, to the client's request.
Well, we can predict them based on our past sprints in which we did have mostly stories, but we've never had a sprint with stories with the current team, or at least with majority stories. So I think once we launch into phase 1 development, that's when we will figure all these things out.
So are we going to have one more sprint on phase 0? Is that what I heard you say?
No. Phase 0 is done and done. That's it. It's over. It's just that we haven't started on any phase 1 stories, because even though we have a few in our backlog, I suspect that what's going to be prudent to do at this point is to sit down with the client, look at those stories again, reprioritize them, get the client to come up with whatever else they suddenly realize needs to be done in phase 1 as well.
Busy work.
What's that?
Nothing. I said busy work.
Yeah, well, it will be. But at that point, we will be doing mostly point stories and then taking on these chores and tasks only when time permits, so then we'll be able to calculate our velocity a lot better too.
Okay.
Okay, guys. So see you at the Scrum and retrospective tomorrow.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.